I think it's really critical to understand that the interaction between aviation and climate is a two-way street. We're all at the conference this week because we're concerned about aviation's impact on the climate and protecting the climate from aviation. It's important that we don't forget that we also have to protect aviation from the changing climate. That's something that we mustn't sweep under the carpet. There are big consequences coming our way in terms of more turbulence, more lightning, a whole host of effects. And my worry is that we'll decarbonize and that will go nicely, but that we'll have forgotten to adapt the sector to the climate change that's actually coming our way pretty much whether we reach net zero or not. It's already baked into the system to some extent. Airports, of course, are located where people are located, logically, and people are disproportionately located near the coast. A large fraction of the world's population lives within 100 kilometres of the coastline, where there's a real risk from rising sea levels, coupled with storm surges threatening to close airports, and we've seen that happening in recent years. In New York, for example, after Hurricane Sandy, when LaGuardia was shut for a number of days because the whole airfield was underwater. That's the kind of thing we might see more frequently in future. There's something called the committed climate change, which is the future climate change. Hasn't happened yet, but it will happen from our historic emissions, because when you put CO2 in the atmosphere, it doesn't immediately warm overnight. It takes actually decades. So if we stabilise the carbon dioxide today at today's value, the climate will continue to warm for decades, and all the consequences that come with that, such as a lot more turbulence in future as well, which is a real hazard, of course, to flying aircraft, and not something that passengers like usually as well. I'm aware of a study which has estimated, for example, that 2/3 of all flights deviate away from the most fuel-efficient altitude because of turbulence. So they're avoiding turbulence, which is great, but there's more CO2 into the atmosphere because they're flying at an altitude that's not optimized. Now, I think safety is at the heart of the aviation sector, and when we're all glad for that. We should always try and avoid turbulence, even if there's a CO2 penalty. But it's important to acknowledge that that penalty is there, and sometimes there's a tension, isn't there, in aviation? We avoid one hazard, but there's a negative consequence. We always pay the price for it. I am an optimist. I mean, there are over 500 people here in Miami this week committed to decarbonising the aviation sector. Some of the smartest people out there are here this week striving to make that happen. So I have always been optimistic. What I'm less optimistic about is the sector adapting to these climate change impacts. I think it gets forgotten about a little bit. I'm very hopeful for a future where we can fly, and I think we should all be able to fly. But for it to be sustainable, I think is within our grasp. Humans are clever. We can do this. It's not like flying to the moon. You know, it's decarbonising flying. How hard can that be? And we have the technology. We just need to have the right investments and push it to happen. But my slightly more pessimistic picture is will we have adapted the sector to rising sea levels, takeoff weight restrictions, more lightning strikes, more turbulence, modified headwinds and tailwinds from the jet stream. These are things we need to think about too, and I think often they're missing from the picture, and I'm really glad that they're being represented in Miami today.